So we often think the loudest voice, the most forceful approach, that's what wins a confrontation.
Yeah, that's a really common misconception, isn't it? But what if real strength is actually quieter, something internal?
Exactly. And history gives us this incredible example, Miyamoto Musashi.
Right. Credited with, what was it, 60 undefeated duels? To the death.
60. It's staggering. And his edge wasn't just like being good with a sword.
No, not at all. It was this deep mastery of his own mind, his own state.
60 wins under that kind of pressure. That's really the core of what we want to dig into today. We're not after quick fixes here, but more a fundamental grasp of how you can maintain calm when things really get intense.
So our mission, if you like, is to unpack Musashi's framework. It seems to be a four-step process for staying centered in conflict.
And hopefully offer you listening a bit of a shortcut to understanding this really powerful skill. We're drawing on principles from his writings, primarily.
Okay, so where do we start? Let's think about our natural reaction. Confrontation happens. What goes on inside us?
Instantly. Right. Your body floods with stress hormones, heart races.
Your focus narrows right down, usually onto whatever feels like the threat.
It's that primal fight or flight kicking in. Totally automatic.
And in that state, it feels almost impossible not to react, often emotionally.
Oh, absolutely. Think about a time you were just furious. That feeling, it just takes over everything. Your thoughts, what you do next.
Precisely. And Musashi saw that tendency as a real weakness in a conflict, letting those emotions just drive the bus. It clouds your judgment, limits your options.
So his first principle tackles this head on.
Yes. He called it emotional distance. It's about creating a kind of mental space.
Space between.
Where?
The trigger and the reaction.
Exactly. Between the stimulus and your response. He talked about it like observing the whole thing from above, almost detached, like watching clouds drift by.
Okay, so you're not in the storm, you're watching it. I get that conceptually. But how do you actually do that when someone's, shouting at you?
Well, it starts with a really subtle shift. It's in your internal talk. So instead of thinking, I am so angry right now, identifying with the anger, you consciously think, I notice I'm feeling anger. That little phrase, I notice, it creates this tiny but crucial buffer. You're acknowledging the feeling, sure, but you're not letting it be you in that moment.
That makes a lot of sense. You're creating a little pocket of awareness. It stops that immediate knee-jerk thing we often regret later.
Right. The key insight here, really, is that true power starts when you observe your emotions rather than just being swept away by them. You need that mental buffer.
And Musashi himself, he tested this in the most extreme situations imaginable, right? Life or death duels.
Absolutely. Take his most famous duel, the one with Sasaki Kojiro.
Right, Kojiro was supposed to be this incredibly skilled, very aggressive fighter.
Exactly. And Musashi deliberately showed up late.
Seriously, why?
Think about it. It was a calculated move. It almost certainly made Kojiro more frustrated, probably angrier, less centered.
While Musashi presumably stayed cool?
While Musashi maintained his composure, yeah. Observing Kojiro, observing the situation, keeping that clarity.
Wow. Talk about mental games under pressure. Okay, so for you listening, how can you start practicing this? What's a concrete step for creating emotional distance?
It's actually quite simple to start. Whenever you feel a strong emotion bubbling up, could be in a big argument or even just a minor disagreement, try silently saying to yourself, I notice I'm feeling, and then name the emotion. I notice I'm feeling frustrated or annoyed or anxious.
Just labeling it.
Just labeling it. That simple act starts to build that separation. And what's really cool is that modern science totally backs this up.
How so?
Brain scans show that when you consciously label an emotion, it actually activates your prefrontal cortex. That's the more rational thinking part of your brain.
Okay.
And activating that part helps to dial down the activity in the emotional centers, like the amygdala. It's a technique used all the time in therapy, actually, for managing things like stress and anxiety.
It's amazing how often these ancient practices line up with modern neuroscience. Okay, so we've got this idea of creating emotional space. Building on that, what's the second piece of Musashi's framework?
Right. So once you have that space, that moment to observe instead of just react, you can use that clarity to think ahead.
Okay.
This leads to Musashi's second principle, anticipatory awareness. Sometimes it's called foreknowledge.
Foreknowledge. Sounds a bit like mind reading.
Yeah, it does sound a bit mystical, but it's really not. It's much more about understanding predictable patterns in how humans behave during conflict.
Patterns? Like what?
Well, think about it. When someone feels threatened, how do they usually react? When they're angry, what does that typically look like? People aren't completely unpredictable.
Right. It's more like chess, maybe. You can't know the exact next move, but a good player sees the likely possibilities based on the situation.
That's a great analogy. Exactly. You anticipate probable responses based on patterns, based on the state of play. It's not magic, it's understanding dynamics. The key insight is anticipating likely reactions by understanding these human patterns. It lets you prepare mentally.
So it's not just about focusing on the other person in the moment, but understanding the broader landscape of conflict.
Precisely. And interestingly, our bodies even react differently to stress we see coming versus stress that just hits us out of the blue.
Oh, how's that?
A sudden shock, an unexpected confrontation, it triggers this huge dump of stress hormones, can feel really overwhelming, make you freeze up or lash out.
Yeah, that feeling of being totally blindsided.
Right. But if you anticipate a challenge, your brain can kind of prepare more strategically. It might release smaller amounts of those same hormones, but in a way that actually sharpens your focus, gets you ready.
That makes total sense. Being caught off guard is definitely more jarring. And Musashi, he was known for being incredibly prepared before his duels, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely meticulous. He'd study his opponents intensely, learn their favorite techniques, their temperament, basically how they tended to react under pressure.
Like scouting reports, but for duels.
Pretty much. Go back to that Kojiro duel again. Musashi knew Kojiro was famous for using a very long sword.
Okay.
So on his way to the duel, Musashi actually stopped and carved himself a wooden sword from an oar, making it deliberately longer than Kojiro's blade.
No way. To counter the reach advantage.
Exactly. That little bit of anticipation, based on knowing his opponent, gave him a critical edge.
It really is about understanding the likely shape of the conflict before it even starts. So for you listening, how can you use this anticipatory awareness in, say, a difficult conversation at work or home?
Well, here's a practical exercise. Before you go into that potentially tricky conversation, just take, say, 30 seconds. Ask yourself 3 quick questions.
Okay, what are they?
1, what's this person's likely emotional state coming into this? Are they stressed, defensive, open? 2, what do they really want out of this interaction? What's their underlying goal?
Okay, state and goal. What's the third?
And 3, what are the maybe 3 most likely ways they might react to what I need to say or do?
Got it. Emotional state, their goal, likely reactions.
Just thinking that through beforehand starts training your brain to spot those patterns we talked about. You start recognizing, okay, this manager usually gets defensive about feedback, or this friend tends to avoid direct conflict.
So it takes the surprise element out of it. If you've already thought they might get defensive, then when they do get defensive, it doesn't throw you off balance as much.
Exactly. It diffuses the emotional shock. Think about FBI hostage negotiators.
Yeah.
They spend a huge amount of time profiling people, trying to predict how they'll behave in these super high-stress situations. That foreknowledge is what allows them to stay calm, choose their words carefully, and de-escalate things.
So anticipation turns what could be chaos into something more navigable. You feel more prepared, more in control. Okay, so we've got emotional distance creating space and anticipatory awareness helping us see what might be coming. What's the third pillar in Musashi's system for calm?
The third vital piece is strategic breathing. Musashi really got the deep connection between how we breathe and our mental or emotional state.
Yeah, that seems fundamental.
He observed that fear, anger, panic, they almost always show up first in the breath. It gets shallow, rapid, uneven.
We've all felt that. Chest tightens. Breathing gets quick.
Totally. So he taught that mastering your breath is a direct way to master your mind.
It makes sense. When you're calm, your breathing is usually slow and deep. When you're scared or angry, it's fast and shallow.
And crucially, that link works both ways. It's not just that emotions change breathing. Changing your breathing can change your emotions.
How does that work physiologically?
Well, you're essentially influencing your nervous system. Fast, shallow breathing tends to trigger the sympathetic nervous system, that's the fight or flight response. Slow, deep, controlled breathing engages the parasympathetic nervous system.
Which is the rest and digest system, the calming one.
Exactly. It promotes calm, relaxation, clarity. So the insight here is you can consciously control your breath to directly influence your emotional state. It's a powerful tool for finding calm.
Like a physiological lever for your emotions.
Did Musashi have a specific technique he recommended?
He did. Before crucial moments, like right before engaging in a duel, he'd often use a specific rhythm. It was basically You inhale through the nose for about 4 counts, hold it just briefly, and then exhale slowly through the mouth for about 6 counts.
4 in, 6 out. Why the longer exhale?
That extended exhale is particularly effective at stimulating that calming parasympathetic response.
Okay, that's simple enough to remember. 4 in, 6 out. How can you listening use this strategic breathing day to day?
Honestly, you can use that exact 4-6 pattern anytime things start feeling tense. Could be before a big presentation, during a heated argument with your partner, maybe even when you're stuck in traffic and feel that frustration rising.
Just pause and do a cycle. Just take 1 or 2 cycles. Inhale 4, exhale 6. Even just one round can sometimes create a noticeable shift. A little bit more calm, a bit more space. You might be surprised.
It's encouraging that something so simple can be effective.
Yeah.
Okay, let's recap quickly. We've got emotional distance for space, anticipatory awareness for preparation, and strategic breathing for physiological calm. What's the final principle that ties it all together?
The fourth principle, and it really integrates the others, is purposeful action.
Purposeful action. Meaning?
Musashi strongly believed that having a clear, defined objective in a confrontation is way more powerful than just being driven by raw emotion like anger or fear.
So while his opponent might be flailing around emotionally,
Musashi would remain focused on his goal, acting with a specific purpose in mind.
I remember reading in the Book of Five Rings, he talks about not necessarily intending to strike first, but always staying centered on the ultimate objective.
Precisely. Every move, every decision wasn't just a reaction. It served his larger aim in that conflict, which often went beyond just, winning the immediate exchange.
Having that clear purpose must really change the dynamic.
Absolutely. If you're just reacting emotionally, you're playing their game on their terms. But if you stay anchored to your purpose, you keep control over the direction of things. The insight is, define your objective clearly beforehand. That purpose gives you direction and focus, helping you override those purely reactive emotions.
It makes me think of arguments that just completely derail. They start about one thing, then suddenly you're dragging up stuff from years ago, attacking each other personally.
Exactly. And that often happens because both people have completely lost sight of the original point, the initial purpose of even having the conversation.
So how do you maintain that focus? What's the technique?
Before you go into any situation that might get confrontational, take a moment to define your true objective. What outcome really serves your best interests here? Boil it down to one clear, simple sentence.
Okay, define the objective, then what?
Then keep that sentence in your mind during the interaction. When you feel those strong emotions starting to pull you off course of the anger, the defensiveness, silently repeat your purpose to yourself.
Like an anchor.
Exactly like an anchor. It helps stop you from getting swept away by those temporary feelings.
So it's not about pretending you don't have emotions. It's not suppression.
Not at all. It's about directing them. Your emotions are still there, but they become resources that serve your purpose instead of being the thing that dictates your actions.
That makes sense. You're channeling the energy rather than being controlled by it.
Precisely. And this fourth principle, purposeful action, it really brings the other three together beautifully. You use emotional distance to get the space, anticipatory awareness to prepare, strategic breathing to stay calm, and then purposeful action directs all of that towards a meaningful outcome.
It's a really elegant, interconnected system when you lay it out like that. And you mentioned earlier, these principles connect to deeper ideas.
They really do. You can see echoes of some profound philosophical concepts. Emotional distance, for instance, feels very connected to the Buddhist idea of non-attachment, not getting hooked by every thought or feeling that pops up.
Okay.
Anticipatory awareness. That feels like transcending just the immediate, narrow view of the present, seeing a bigger picture. Strategic breathing lets you kind of experientially understand the impermanence of emotions, how they rise and fall, like the breath itself.
And purposeful action.
That resonates strongly with the Taoist concept of wu wei, not necessarily inaction, but effortless action, action that flows naturally from intention and aligns with the way things are, rather than just forcing things reactively.
It's fascinating how relevant these ancient insights feel today. Maybe even more relevant.
I think so. We live in this era of, constant potential confrontation, don't we? Social media, political divides, just the general stress of modern life.
Yeah, I feel like the pressure is always on.
And the irony is, we probably need this kind of emotional control more than ever, but maybe we practice it less because everything feels so immediate, so reactive.
That's a really good point. We see so much instant reaction online. It's easy to just mirror that ourselves without thinking.
But the person who can cultivate that inner calm in today's environment, they gain a real advantage. It's like accessing a different level of clarity, of insight.
You can almost see it in people who are really skilled at handling conflict. They just seem calmer, more intentional.
They seem to operate on a different wavelength somehow. And there's another benefit, too, that's often overlooked.
What's that?
When you master your own reactions, when you choose not to engage emotionally with every little provocation, you start to realize something important.
Which is?
That a lot of confrontations just fizzle out. They only have power if you feed them with your own reaction. If you don't react, many of them simply dissolve.
So true power isn't about winning every fight.
No, I think true power lies in knowing which confrontations actually matter and engaging in those with clarity, with purpose, and with calm.
So a final thought for you listening. As you go about your day, just consider how applying even one of these ideas, maybe creating a bit more emotional distance, or practicing that 4-6 breath, or defining your purpose before a tough chat, how might that change your next challenging interaction?
And maybe think about what unnecessary conflicts you might just sidestep entirely. It's worth reflecting on your own patterns and the potential for finding a bit more calm and clarity in the middle of it all.